You're just ordinary, my son said, loud enough for his friends to hear. The words hit me like a slap across the face, but I kept my expression neutral. 23 years old, standing in his new apartment that his father and stepmother had helped him secure, surrounded by his college friends who were all dressed in designer clothes I could never afford. The birthday cake sat untouched on the granite countertop, a cake I'd baked at 5 a.m. before my first cleaning job of the day. I mean, think about it, Daniel continued, gesturing with his beer bottle toward me like I was an exhibit in a museum. You clean other people's houses for a living. Dad's new wife just bought a vacation home in Malibu. There's a difference between people who make things happen and people who just exist. His friends shifted uncomfortably. Some of them had known me since Daniel was in elementary school. They'd seen me at soccer games, school plays, parent-teacher conferences. Always alone because his father had been too busy building his real estate empire to show up. But none of them said anything. Why would they? I was just the cleaning lady. I smiled, the same smile I'd perfected over 20 years of biting my tongue. Well, I said quietly, I should probably get going, early morning tomorrow. Of course you do, Daniel laughed, not unkindly, but with that casual dismissiveness that hurt more than outright cruelty. The toilets don't clean themselves, right? More uncomfortable silence. I gathered my purse and the small gift bag I'd brought, a vintage watch I'd found at an estate sale and had restored. It had cost me 2 weeks of grocery money, but it was the kind of thing Daniel used to love when he was younger, back when we'd spend Saturday mornings hunting through thrift stores and antique shops together. Daniel, I said, placing the bag on the counter, on the happy birthday, sweetheart. He barely glanced at it. Thanks, Mom. Really, I'll call you later this week, okay? I nodded and walked toward the door. Behind me, I heard one of his friends ask, Dude, was that a little harsh? And Daniel's response, What? I'm just being honest. She needs to face reality sometime. The elevator ride down felt like the longest 60 seconds of my life. My reflection stared back at me from the polished steel doors. A 58-year-old woman in a discount store dress, hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, hands that showed every year of scrubbing other people's messes. Ordinary. That's what I looked like. That's what everyone saw. But appearances, I'd learned, could be deceiving. I'd been 17 when I got pregnant with Daniel. His father, Richard, had been 25, charismatic, and full of promises about the future we'd build together. We got married 3 months before Daniel was born, and for a while it felt like a fairy tale. Richard was starting his real estate business, and I was going to be the supportive wife who helped him achieve his dreams. The divorce papers came when Daniel was 3. Richard had found someone more compatible with his lifestyle. Translation, someone whose father owned half the commercial real estate in the county. The settlement was minimal. Richard's business was just getting started, the lawyer said. Most of his assets were tied up in investments that might not pan out. I got the small house we'd bought when we were still playing happy family, a modest monthly support payment, and full custody of Daniel. You'll be fine, Richard had said during our last conversation as a married couple. You're resourceful. You'll figure something out. Figure something out. That became my motto. I started cleaning houses because it was flexible. I could work around Daniel's school schedule, and most of my clients paid cash. Mrs. Henderson was my first regular client. She was elderly, widowed, and needed help maintaining the massive Victorian house she'd lived in for 40 years. $25 for 4 hours of work seemed like a fortune back then. You know, dear, Mrs. Henderson had said one afternoon while I was polishing her dining room table, I've been thinking about selling this place. Too big for just me, and the property values in this neighborhood have gone through the roof. I'd made a non-committal sound, focused on removing a stubborn water stain from the mahogany. The young couple next door just sold for 3 times what they paid 5 years ago. It's crazy, really. If I were younger, I'd be buying up every property I could get my hands on. That conversation planted a seed. That night, after Daniel was asleep, I sat at my kitchen table with a calculator and every real estate listing I could find in the newspaper. Numbers had always made sense to me. Unlike people, they didn't lie or change their minds or abandon you for someone with a better pedigree. Mrs. Henderson's neighborhood was indeed booming, but there were pockets just 2 miles away where houses were selling for a fraction of the price. Houses that needed work, yes, but houses with good bones in areas that were showing early signs of development pressure. I started small, very small. I took every cleaning job I could find and saved 60% of everything I earned. I ate peanut butter sandwiches for lunch and dinner most days. I shopped at thrift stores and learned to repair instead of replace. I told Daniel we were being resourceful and creative, turning our frugal lifestyle into an adventure. When Daniel was 6, I bought my first investment property, a tiny 2-bedroom house that had been abandoned after a foreclosure. I paid $12,000 for it with savings and a small loan against my own house. The roof leaked, the plumbing was a disaster, and there was a family of raccoons living in the attic. I spent every weekend for 6 months learning to fix what I could and hiring contractors for what I couldn't. YouTube became my university. I learned to install flooring, paint like a professional, and even do basic electrical work. Daniel thought it was the coolest thing in the world. His mom was like a superhero who could fix anything. I rented that house for $800 a month to a young teacher who needed an affordable place close to her school. After mortgage, taxes, and maintenance reserves, I cleared about $300 monthly. It wasn't much, but it was a start. By the time Daniel was 10, I owned 3 rental properties. By the time he was 15, I had 7. I reinvested every penny of profit, buying in emerging neighborhoods, fixing up distressed properties, and building a portfolio that grew steadily year after year. The irony wasn't lost on me. While Richard was making a fortune developing luxury condos and strip malls, I was quietly building wealth one small property at a time in the same market he operated in. We'd even crossed paths a few times at county planning meetings, him in his expensive suits representing major developments, me in my work clothes advocating for reasonable rental property regulations. He never recognized me. Why would he? I was just another small-time landlord. Daniel never knew. How could I explain to a teenager that his mother, the woman who cleaned other people's toilets and worried out loud about grocery money, actually had a net worth that was approaching 7 figures? How could I tell him that the ordinary life we lived was a choice, not a circumstance? I wanted him to understand the value of hard work, of earning what you had, of not taking anything for granted. I wanted him to be grounded, humble, grateful. I thought if he saw me struggle, if he had to work for his own spending money, if he learned that success required sacrifice, he'd become the kind of man I could be proud of. Instead, I'd raise someone who was embarrassed by my struggles and impressed by his father's displays of wealth. The drive home from Daniel's birthday party took me through downtown, past the building where I'd opened my small property management office 3 years earlier. Most people assumed it was just a front for my cleaning business, a place to store supplies and meet clients. They weren't entirely wrong. I did run my cleaning service from there. But upstairs, in a small office overlooking the main street, I managed a portfolio of 23 rental properties across 4 different neighborhoods. 23 properties. Total value, approximately $2.3 million. Monthly rental income, $18,000. After mortgages, taxes, maintenance, and reserves, my net monthly profit was around $8,000. I parked in my driveway and sat in the silence for a moment. The house looked exactly like what it was. A modest 3-bedroom ranch that a single mother might own if she'd been careful with money and made reasonable financial decisions. The lawn was neat but not professionally maintained. The car in the driveway was reliable but not impressive. Everything about my visible life screamed ordinary. Inside, I poured myself a glass of wine. Not an expensive bottle, but not the cheapest option either, and sat at my kitchen table with my laptop. I pulled up my property management software and scrolled through the monthly reports. Vacancy rate, less than 2%. Average rent increases over the past 5 years, 37%. Portfolio appreciation, estimated at 42% since I'd started buying. On paper, I was more successful than most of the people who employed me to clean their houses. I had more assets than many of the parents at Daniel's college, who looked at me with polite condescension when they learned what I did for a living. I had built something significant and lasting from nothing more than determination and a willingness to work harder than anyone else. But my son thought I was ordinary. My phone sat silent on the counter. No calls, no texts, no follow-up from the birthday party. Daniel was probably telling his friends stories about his eccentric mother, who still thought she could give him meaningful gifts, while his father and stepmother were likely planning their next vacation to their new Malibu house. I opened my laptop and began typing an email to my property management company's lead maintenance coordinator. 3 of my properties needed minor repairs, and I wanted to schedule them for the following week. As I worked, muscle memory took over. The same systematic approach I'd used for 20 years to build something substantial from seemingly ordinary beginnings. Ordinary. The word echoed in my mind as I reviewed tenant applications and approved maintenance requests. If being ordinary meant working 3 jobs to support your child while secretly building generational wealth, then I supposed I was guilty as charged. If being ordinary meant sacrificing recognition and respect in order to provide opportunities for someone who didn't appreciate them, then yes, I was extraordinarily ordinary. But sometimes I was beginning to realize being underestimated was the most powerful position of all. I closed the laptop and finished my wine. Tomorrow I had 4 houses to clean and 2 property inspections to conduct. Tomorrow I would wake up at 5:30, put on my work clothes, and continue living the ordinary life that everyone could see, while managing the extraordinary business that no one suspected. The phone remained silent, and for the first time in Daniel's 23 years of life, I found myself hoping it would stay that way. I didn't sleep well that night. Daniel's words kept replaying in my mind, but not in the way you might expect. I wasn't dwelling on the hurt. I'd learned long ago that nursing wounds only made them fester. Instead, I found myself thinking about numbers. Specifically, the numbers that represented 20 years of careful planning, strategic investments, and delayed gratification. At 5:30 the next morning, I made coffee and pulled out the folder I kept in my bedroom closet. Most people would have stored these documents in a safe deposit box or a fireproof safe, but I liked having them close, where I could touch them when I needed reassurance that my life's work was real and substantial. The first document was the deed to my original investment property, that little 2-bedroom house I'd bought when Daniel was 6. It was worth $85,000 now, according to the latest appraisal, $12,000 to $85,000. That was a return of more than 600%, not counting the rental income it had generated over the past 17 years. I spread the other deeds across my kitchen table like a winning poker hand. 23 properties. Some were small single-family homes in neighborhoods that had transformed from questionable to desirable. Others were multi-unit buildings that I'd purchased as distressed assets and renovated into solid income producers. One was a small commercial building that housed a coffee shop, a yoga studio, and a vintage clothing boutique, all paying rent that covered the mortgage 3 times over. The most recent appraisal report sat at the bottom of the stack. Total portfolio value, $2,947,000. Net equity after mortgages, $1,923,000. Monthly net income, $8,200. I was a millionaire, had been for almost 3 years now, and the only person who knew was my accountant, a quiet man in his 70s who prepared my taxes and had never once commented on the discrepancy between my modest lifestyle and my substantial assets. But numbers were just numbers. What mattered was what they represented: freedom, security, options, the power to make choices based on what I wanted rather than what I could afford. I poured another cup of coffee and opened my laptop. The property management software showed the usual overnight updates: a rent payment processed, a maintenance request submitted, a lease renewal signed. The business ran itself now mostly. I had a reliable property manager who handled day-to-day operations, a network of trusted contractors for repairs and renovations, and tenant relationships that had been built over years of fair dealing and prompt responses to problems. This was the moment I'd been working toward without fully realizing it. The moment when I could step back from the cleaning business if I wanted to, when I could reveal the truth about my financial situation, when I could stop pretending to be ordinary. But did I want to? My phone buzzed with a text message. For a split second, I thought it might be Daniel, maybe with an apology or at least an acknowledgement that his words had been unnecessarily harsh. Instead, it was Mrs. Patterson, one of my long-term cleaning clients, asking if I could move Thursday's appointment to Friday because she had a doctor's visit. I confirmed the change and realized something had shifted in my thinking overnight. For the first time in 20 years, I found myself questioning not just what I was doing, but why I was still doing it. The cleaning business had served its purpose. It had provided steady cash flow during the lean years when every dollar of rental income was being reinvested into the next property. It had given me flexibility to handle maintenance emergencies and property inspections. Most importantly, it had provided cover, a believable explanation for my modest lifestyle that didn't invite questions about other sources of income. But I didn't need cover anymore. I didn't need the steady paycheck or the flexible schedule. What I needed was something I'd been avoiding for years: the courage to live authentically. I spent the morning visiting two of my properties: a duplex where one tenant was moving out, and a single-family home where the kitchen faucet had been dripping for a week. These weren't glamorous tasks, but they were mine. I wasn't cleaning someone else's mess or working around someone else's schedule. I was building and maintaining something that belonged to me. The duplex was in Riverside Heights, a neighborhood that had been considered marginal when I'd bought the property 8 years earlier. Now it was full of young professionals who couldn't afford downtown but wanted something more interesting than the suburbs. The tenant who was moving out, a graphic designer named Sarah, had been with me for 3 years. "I hate to leave," she said as we did the final walkthrough. "This place has been perfect for me. But I'm getting married, and we need something bigger." "Congratulations," I said, meaning it. "I hope you'll be very happy." "You know, Margaret, you're the best landlord I've ever had. You actually care about maintaining the property, and you've never raised my rent unreasonably. Most landlords these days—" She shook her head. "Anyway, I've already told my friends about the vacancy. I think you'll have good applications." After she left, I stood in the empty apartment and tried to imagine what it would feel like to sell everything, to liquidate the portfolio, take the profits, and disappear into a completely different life. I could buy a house in Tuscany, learn Italian, spend my mornings painting watercolors of olive groves. I could travel to places I'd only read about, stay in hotels where someone else cleaned the toilets. But even as I entertained the fantasy, I knew it wasn't what I wanted. This business, these properties, this community I'd built, it was mine in a way that nothing else had ever been. Walking away would feel like abandoning not just an investment, but an identity. The single-family home was in Oakwood, my first serious investment neighborhood. I'd bought 4 houses there over the years, watching the area transform from working class to trendy as downtown expanded and young families looked for affordable alternatives to the suburbs. The current tenant, Marcus, was a teacher at the local elementary school. He'd been renting from me for 6 years, and his kids had grown up in that house. "Fixed it myself," he said proudly, showing me the new faucet he'd installed. "YouTube University strikes again. Figured I'd save you the service call." "You didn't have to do that," I said, though I was pleased. Marcus was the kind of tenant every landlord hoped for: responsible, communicative, and genuinely invested in taking care of the property. "Hey, you take good care of us, we take good care of the place. Fair's fair." He paused. "Actually, I've been meaning to ask you something. My wife and I have been talking about maybe buying a house and we were wondering if you'd ever consider selling this one to us. We love the neighborhood, the kids are settled in school here, and honestly, we can't imagine living anywhere else." The question caught me off guard. I'd never sold any of my properties. The business model was built on long-term appreciation and steady rental income. But looking at Marcus, seeing how much he genuinely cared about the house, I found myself considering possibilities I'd never explored. "Let me think about it," I said. "If I did decide to sell, you'd definitely get first right of refusal." Driving home, I realized that my conversation with Marcus had crystallized something important. The success I'd built wasn't just about accumulating assets or generating passive income. It was about creating stability and opportunity for my tenants, for the neighborhoods I'd invested in, and ultimately for myself. But it was also about proving something. To Richard, who'd dismissed me as someone who would figure something out, to all the people who'd looked at me and seen only a cleaning lady, to Daniel, who thought I was ordinary, that last thought stopped me cold. Was I really still trying to prove something to my son? And if so, what was I hoping to accomplish? I pulled into my driveway and sat in the car for a moment, looking at my house with fresh eyes. It was a good house, solid construction, well-maintained in a stable neighborhood. But it wasn't a reflection of my actual financial situation. It was a costume I'd been wearing for so long that I'd almost forgotten it wasn't my real skin. Inside, I made a decision that felt both terrifying and inevitable. I opened my laptop and began drafting an email to my property manager, Rebecca, asking her to schedule a meeting for later in the week. It was time to discuss transitioning my role from hands-on owner to passive investor, time to step back from the day-to-day operations and focus on strategic growth. Then I opened a new browser tab and began researching something I'd never seriously considered before: commercial real estate development. If I was going to stop hiding my success, I might as well use it to build something even more substantial. The phone rang just as I was reading about mixed-use development opportunities in the Arts District downtown. I glanced at the caller ID, expecting to see another client asking about scheduling changes. Instead, I saw Daniel's name. My finger hovered over the answer button. Part of me wanted to let it go to voicemail, to let him experience what it felt like to be ignored, dismissed, treated as if your time and attention weren't valuable. But that would be petty, and pettiness had never served me well. "Hello, Daniel." "Mom?" His voice sounded strained, almost panicked. "Mom, where are you?" "I'm at home. Where else would I be?" "I've been calling you for an hour. Your phone kept going straight to voicemail." I looked at my phone and realized I'd somehow switched it to Do Not Disturb mode. The screen showed 23 missed calls from Daniel, plus several voicemails and text messages. "I'm sorry, honey. I didn't realize my phone was on silent. What's wrong? What's wrong?" His voice cracked slightly. "Mom, what's wrong is that I've been a complete ass and I couldn't reach you, and I thought maybe I don't know, maybe something had happened to you. And the last thing I said was..." He trailed off and I heard him take a shaky breath. "Daniel, I'm fine. I was just out checking on some properties, and then I came home and was doing some work on my computer. I'm perfectly safe." "Properties?" he asked, confusion replacing panic in his voice. "What properties?" This was the moment I'd been unconsciously preparing for without realizing it. The moment when I could choose to continue the charade of ordinariness or step into the truth of who I'd become. "My rental properties," I said simply. "I own 23 of them." Silence stretched between us for so long that I wondered if the call had dropped. What?" "I'm a real estate investor, Daniel. I have been for most of your life. The cleaning business pays the bills and provides cash flow, but real estate is where I've built my actual wealth." More silence. How much wealth are we talking about? I could have softened it, given him the information gradually, let him process it in stages. Instead, I chose honesty. "My portfolio is worth about $2.5 million. After mortgages, my net worth is somewhere around $1.8 million. The sound he made was somewhere between a laugh and a gasp. Mom, are you telling me that you're a millionaire? Yes. And you've been cleaning houses because I wanted you to understand the value of hard work, because I wanted you to be humble and grateful, because I thought if you saw me struggle, you'd appreciate what you had instead of taking it for granted. Another long pause. Oh my God, he said finally. Oh my God, Mom, what have I done? The pain in his voice almost broke my resolve. This was my son, the little boy who used to help me renovate houses and thought I was a superhero because I could fix anything. But he was also the young man who had stood in front of his friends and called me ordinary, who had dismissed my life's work as something to be embarrassed about. You told the truth as you saw it, I said. There's no shame in that. But I was wrong. I was so completely wrong about everything. Were you? I asked. Because from where I'm sitting, you weren't wrong about what you saw. You were wrong about what it meant. I heard him crying then. Soft, almost silent sobs that reminded me of the nights when he was little and had scraped his knee or been picked on at school. It would have been easy to comfort him, to tell him everything was fine and that we'd pretend the conversation at his birthday party had never happened, but I was tired of pretending. Daniel, I said gently, I need you to understand something. I'm not angry with you for seeing me as ordinary. I chose to appear ordinary. What hurts is that you spoke about my work that has supported you your entire life, as if it was something shameful. I know, he whispered. I know, and I'm so sorry. I know you are, and I forgive you, but forgiveness doesn't erase consequences. What do you mean? I looked around my kitchen, at the modest house that had been my cover story for 20 years, and made another decision that felt both liberating and terrifying. It means that things are going to change, Daniel. I'm done hiding who I am and what I've accomplished. I'm done living small to make other people comfortable. And I'm done pretending that being underestimated is always a disadvantage. Mom, what are you saying? I'm saying that your ordinary mother is about to become extraordinary, and you're going to have to decide whether you want to be part of that journey or just an observer of it. The line went quiet again, but this time the silence felt different, heavier, full of possibilities and consequences that neither of us could fully foresee. Can I see you? He asked finally. Can we talk about this in person? I thought about it. Yesterday, I would have said yes immediately. Yesterday, I would have dropped everything to comfort my son and smooth over our conflict. But yesterday, I was still pretending to be ordinary. Not today, I said. I have some things to take care of first, some changes to make, but soon. But how soon? When I'm ready, Daniel. When I've figured out who I want to be now that I don't have to hide anymore. After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen and felt something I hadn't experienced in 20 years, complete freedom of choice. I could continue living modestly and managing my properties quietly. I could sell everything and disappear into a different life entirely. Or I could do something else, something that combined the business skills I developed with the resources I'd accumulated and the energy I'd been suppressing. I opened my laptop again and began researching development opportunities in earnest. By the time the sun set, I had identified 3 potential projects that could transform not just my portfolio, but entire neighborhoods. Projects that would require capital, vision, and the kind of bold risk-taking that I'd been avoiding for 2 decades in favor of steady, incremental growth. Projects that would make it impossible for anyone to call me ordinary ever again. The phone remained silent for the rest of the evening. No more panicked calls from Daniel, no messages from cleaning clients, no emergency maintenance requests from tenants. Just silence, and the sound of my fingers typing as I drafted a business plan that would have been unthinkable 24 hours earlier. Sometimes, I realized, the most powerful response to being underestimated isn't proving people wrong. It's proving them irrelevant.